She was dying. Jacob could see that much from 50 yards away as his paint horse rounded the canyon bend. The woman lay motionless beside the overturned wagon, her blue dress torn and stained dark with blood. Auburn hair spilled across the sun-baked rocks like spilled copper, and her pale arm bent at an angle that made his stomach clench. The Apache warrior's first instinct screamed danger. White settlers used tricks like this, feigning death to lure his people into ambush. His dark eyes swept the surrounding rocks, scanning for the glint of rifle barrels or the subtle movement that would mean soldiers lying in wait. But the scattered belongings, the genuine wreckage, and the growing pool of blood beneath her head told a different story. This was no trap. This was abandonment. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though no clouds marred the blazing Arizona sky. Jacob's horse snorted nervously, sensing the approaching storm that would arrive within hours. In the desert, storms meant flash floods, and this canyon would become a death trap. The woman had perhaps 2 hours before the waters would claim whatever the injuries hadn't already taken. Jacob dismounted silently, his moccasined feet making no sound on the stone. At 28, he had survived more battles than most men twice his age, earned his place among the fiercest warriors of his band. His people were at war with hers, had every reason to hate the white settlers who stole their land and slaughtered their families. Walking away would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But as he knelt beside her still form, something stirred in his chest that had nothing to do with wisdom or safety. The woman's eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of spring grass. For a heartbeat, confusion clouded her gaze. Then she saw him, saw the war paint on his cheekbones, the traditional beadwork on his leather vest, the hunting knife at his side. Terror flooded her features. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. "Don't kill me." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. Kill her. She was already dying. Her left arm was clearly broken, the gash on her forehead had bled heavily, and her breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. Death was already claiming her inch by inch. "What is your name?" he asked in carefully pronounced English, his accent thick but understandable. She hesitated, weighing her chances. "Ella," she finally breathed. "Ella Morrison." "I am Jacob." He paused, the next words surprising him as they emerged. "I will not harm you." The promise hung between them, heavy with meaning neither fully grasped yet. In that moment, the Apache warrior had bound himself to something that could destroy them both. Ella tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back with a strangled cry. Jacob's hands moved instinctively to steady her, his calloused fingers gentle against her fevered skin. She didn't pull away, perhaps understanding that he represented her only hope of survival. "My arm," she gasped, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "I think it's broken." "Yes," Jacob confirmed, examining the injury with experienced eyes. He had treated many wounds, both in battle and after hunting accidents. "You have lost much blood. Where were you going?" "California." Her green eyes searched the scattered wreckage frantically. "Where's Thomas? Where's my brother?" Jacob had already noted the horse tracks leading east, already fading under the desert wind. Old tracks, at least half a day old. "He is gone," he said simply. The brutal truth hit Ella like a second blow. Her brother had left her here to die rather than slow down his own escape. The betrayal showed in her eyes, a pain deeper than any physical wound. Another rumble of thunder, closer now. Jacob glanced at the darkening horizon and made his decision. The storm would arrive within 2 hours, and in her condition, Ella wouldn't survive it. His people's camp lay 2 days' ride through dangerous territory, but it was her only chance. "Can you ride?" he asked, though her pallor already gave him the answer. "I don't think so. Everything spins when I try to move." Jacob nodded grimly. Carrying her would slow their escape and make them vulnerable to both the storm and any cavalry patrols in the area. But leaving her meant certain death, and something in him refused to accept that outcome. "My people have a camp in the mountains," he said. "There is a medicine woman who can heal your wounds." New fear flickered in Ella's eyes. "Your people? Other Apache?" "Yes." Jacob met her gaze steadily. "They will not harm you while you are under my protection." It was a dangerous promise. Some of his band had lost family to white soldiers, and their hatred burned deep. But Jacob was respected among his people, and his word carried weight. If he declared this woman under his protection, most would honor that declaration, even if they questioned his sanity. "Why?" Ella's voice was fading, exhaustion and blood loss taking their toll. "Why would you help me?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that would haunt them both in the days to come. His people and hers were enemies, locked in a war that seemed to have no end. She represented everything that threatened his way of life, yet here he was, prepared to risk everything for her survival. But as he looked at her lying there, abandoned and broken, Jacob realized the answer was simpler than he had thought. "Because it is right," he said, the words carrying absolute conviction. Lightning split the sky in the distance as Jacob began gathering supplies from the wagon wreckage. He found a water barrel that had survived the crash, some dried food, and a blanket that wasn't too badly torn. Working quickly, he secured these to his horse before returning to Ella. "This will hurt," he warned, then carefully lifted her into his arms. Ella bit back a scream as he settled her onto his horse, her broken arm sending waves of agony through her body. But she didn't protest, understanding that pain was the price of survival. Jacob mounted behind her, his strong arms encircling her to hold the reins. As they rode away from the wreckage, Ella leaned back against his chest, too weak to worry about propriety. His warmth and strength were oddly comforting, and despite everything she had been taught about his people, she felt safer in his arms than she had since leaving Missouri. The first drops of rain began to fall as they disappeared into the canyon, and behind them the flash flood began to build. Within an hour, all trace of the wagon and Ella's former life would be swept away forever. Neither spoke as they rode into the gathering storm, but both understood that their meeting had set forces in motion that could not be stopped. In a land torn by hatred and violence, they had found something unexpected in each other, something that would be tested by trials neither could imagine. The thunder grew louder and Jacob urged his horse faster. They had perhaps an hour before the real danger began, and 2 days of hard riding ahead through territory where discovery could mean death for them both. But as lightning illuminated the canyon walls around them, Jacob found himself thinking not of the dangers ahead, but of the woman in his arms and the choice that had already changed both their lives forever. The storm hit with savage fury. Jacob pressed his horse harder through the narrow canyon as sheets of rain turned the desert floor into a churning river of mud and debris. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, illuminating the treacherous path ahead in stark white flashes. Behind them he could hear the roar of the flash flood, claiming the wreckage site where Ella would have died. "Hold on!" he shouted over the thunder, his arm tightening around the woman slumped against his chest. Her breathing had grown more labored in the past hour, and he could feel fever burning through her torn dress. The broken bone in her arm was likely becoming infected, and without proper medicine, she had perhaps a day before blood poisoning claimed her life. Ella stirred weakly, her green eyes opening to meet his for a moment. "Am I going to die?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. Jacob didn't answer immediately. Honesty was valued among his people above all else, but sometimes mercy required silence. Instead, he guided his horse toward a shallow overhang he had spotted ahead, a place where they could wait out the worst of the storm. "Not today," he finally said, and meant it. The rocky shelter provided minimal protection, but it was enough to escape the driving rain. Jacob dismounted carefully, then lifted Ella down with practiced gentleness. She bit back another cry of pain, her face going white but remained conscious. That was good. Unconsciousness now might mean she wouldn't wake up. As Jacob built a small fire with dry wood he had gathered earlier, Ella watched him with growing fascination despite her pain. His movements were economical, precise, speaking of years spent surviving in harsh conditions. When he pulled out traditional Apache medicines from his saddlebags, she couldn't hide her surprise. "You came prepared to help me," she observed. "I came prepared to hunt," Jacob corrected, mixing ground willow bark with water. "But medicine is medicine." He handed her the bitter mixture. "Drink. It will help with pain and fever." Ella hesitated only briefly before downing the concoction. The taste was terrible, but within minutes she could feel some relief spreading through her body. "How do you know English so well?" Jacob fed small branches to the growing fire, his face thoughtful in the flickering light. "Missionaries came to our territory when I was young. They wanted to teach us their God's words." His tone carried old bitterness. "They also taught us how your people think, how they plan to take everything from us." The accusation hung between them, and Ella felt the weight of her race's sins settle on her shoulders. She had heard the stories, of course, the tales of savage Indians attacking innocent settlers, but she had never heard the other side, never considered what drove the Apache to such desperation. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for what my people have done to yours." Jacob looked at her with surprise. In his experience, white people rarely acknowledged wrongdoing, much less apologized for it. "Words do not bring back the dead," he said, "but they are a beginning." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the desert, but inside their small shelter, an unexpected conversation began to unfold. As Jacob tended to Ella's wounds with surprising skill, she found herself asking questions she had never dared voice before. "What was your life like before the soldiers came?" Jacob's hand stilled for a moment as he secured the makeshift splint on her arm. We followed the seasons. Hunted when the deer ran fat, gathered plants when they ripened, moved when the land told us to move. We lived as our ancestors did for countless generations. And now we hide in the mountains like hunted animals, watching our children grow thin because the game is scarce and the good hunting grounds belong to your farmers. His voice carried no self-pity, only stark truth. My younger sister died last winter from a cough that the old medicines could not cure. She was only 12. Ella closed her eyes, feeling the pain in his words like a physical blow. I didn't know. I knew there was fighting, but I never thought about the cost to your people. Few of your kind do, Jacob said simply. It is easier to call us savages than to see us as people with families, with hopes, with grief. The fire crackled between them as rain drummed against the rock above. Despite everything, Ella found herself feeling safer here with this Apache warrior than she had felt in months of traveling with her own brother. Jacob had risked his life to save her, while Thomas had abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. Why did you really help me? She asked again. And don't say because it was right. There's more to it than that. Jacob was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I have seen too much death. Because maybe if I can save one life, it will balance some of the lives I have taken. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Here was a man who had killed, probably many times, yet who had chosen mercy when it would have been easier to choose vengeance. Ella found herself studying his face in the firelight, noting the lines of pain around his dark eyes, the weight of responsibility in his bearing. How many men have you killed? She asked, then immediately regretted the question. I'm sorry, that's not my business. 17, Jacob answered without hesitation. All soldiers, all trying to kill my people. He met her gaze steadily. Does that frighten you? It should have. Everything she had been taught told her she should be terrified of this man, this enemy who had taken so many lives. But as she looked at him, saw the gentleness with which he had treated her wounds, the care with which he had built their fire, Ella found that fear was the furthest thing from her mind. No, she said softly. It makes me understand you better. Something shifted in Jacob's expression, a wall coming down that he hadn't even realized he had built. When had he last been able to speak honestly about the things he had done, the choices he had made? His own people respected his prowess as a warrior, but they didn't question the necessity of his actions. This white woman, this enemy, was the first person in years to look at him and see not just a killer, but a man carrying the weight of necessary violence. Tell me about Thomas, Jacob said, changing the subject before the moment became too intense. Why did he leave you? Ella's face hardened, pain flashing in her green eyes. He was always weak. Father knew it, but Thomas was his only son, so he left him the farm. When the Apache raids got worse in Missouri, Thomas decided we should go to California, start over. She laughed bitterly. I thought he wanted to protect me. I realize now he just wanted someone else to handle the difficult decisions. And when the wagon crashed, he helped me out, saw that I was badly hurt, and panicked. Started talking about how he couldn't carry me, how I would slow him down, how the Apache would catch us both. Tears ran down her cheeks, though her voice remained steady. He took the horse and most of the supplies and rode away, didn't even look back. Jacob felt anger building in his chest, a cold fury at such cowardice. Among his people, family bonds were sacred. A man who would abandon his sister would be cast out, shunned by the entire tribe. The fact that Thomas had left Ella to die spoke to a weakness of character that disgusted the Apache warrior. He is not worthy to call you sister, Jacob said fiercely. The simple declaration warmed Ella more than the fire ever could. Here was a man who barely knew her, who owed her nothing, yet who showed more loyalty than her own blood. What will happen when we reach your people? She asked. Will they accept your protection of me? Jacob considered the question carefully. Some will, others will not. There are those among my band who have lost much to your people. They will see you as an enemy who should be killed or traded for supplies. He paused, stoking the fire. But I am respected among them. My word carries weight. If I say you are under my protection, most will honor that. And if they don't? Jacob's hand moved to rest on the handle of his knife. Then I will protect you with my life. The vow was made simply, without drama or grand gestures, but Ella heard the steel beneath the words. This Apache warrior, this man she had been taught to fear and hate, was prepared to die for her. The realization left her speechless. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, the thunder growing more distant. Soon they would have to continue their journey, heading deeper into Apache territory with all the dangers that entailed. But for now, In this small shelter with the fire warming them both, an impossible bond was forming between two people who should have been enemies. "Jacob," Ella said softly, and he looked up from the fire. "When we reach your people, what will happen to me? I mean, assuming they don't kill me." "You will heal," he said simply, "and then you will have choices to make." "What kind of choices?" Jacob met her gaze, and in his dark eyes she saw possibilities she had never imagined, futures that both terrified and thrilled her. "That," he said, "is something we will discover together." As the fire burned low and the rain softened to a gentle patter, they settled in to wait for dawn. Neither slept easily, both acutely aware of the other's presence, of the strange intimacy forced upon them by circumstances. They were enemies who had become reluctant allies, strangers bound together by a choice that had already changed both their lives. The storm passed, but the real tempest was only beginning. They were watching him. Jacob felt the eyes of his people tracking his movements as he guided his horse into the hidden canyon that served as their temporary camp. 37 Apache warriors, women and children, looked up from their morning tasks, their expressions shifting from relief at his return to shock when they saw the white woman in his arms. Ella had fallen unconscious an hour before dawn, her fever spiking despite the willowbark medicine. Her face was flushed and her breathing shallow, the infection from her broken arm spreading faster than Jacob had hoped. She needed immediate attention from Ayana, their medicine woman, or she would be dead before the sun reached its peak. "Jacob!" His younger brother Keme jogged toward them, his face bright with welcome that quickly faded when he saw Ella. "Brother, what have you done?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. What Jacob had done was bring their enemy into their sanctuary, risk the safety of their entire band for one white woman. Every person in the camp understood the implications immediately. "She needs healing," Jacob said simply, dismounting and carefully lifting Ella into his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the heat radiating from her fevered body. "Where is Ayana?" "Jacob, you cannot be serious." The voice belonged to Nalnish, one of their war leaders, a man who had lost his wife and 2 children to cavalry soldiers the previous spring. His scarred face was hard with anger as he approached. "This woman's people murdered my family. Why should we waste medicine keeping her alive?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. Jacob saw the faces of his people, read the mix of confusion, anger, and betrayal in their expressions. Many had suffered losses at the hands of white settlers and soldiers. To them, Ella represented everything that had destroyed their world. "Because I have given my word that she will be protected," Jacob replied, his voice carrying across the camp with quiet authority. "Will my people make me a liar?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke from their cooking fires. Jacob was not just any warrior, he was one of their most respected fighters, a man whose judgment had saved them countless times. To directly oppose him would be to challenge his status within the tribe, something few were prepared to do. An elderly woman emerged from one of the wickiups, her grey hair braided with sacred beads, her weathered face bearing the wisdom of 7 decades. Ayana, the medicine woman, studied Ella with keen eyes before looking at Jacob. "She is dying," Ayana observed matter-of-factly. "The bone sickness spreads through her blood. Why do you want me to save her life?" Jacob met the old woman's gaze steadily. Ayana had delivered him into the world, had taught him which plants healed and which killed, had guided him through his first vision quest. If anyone deserved an honest answer, it was her. "Because when I found her, abandoned and broken, I saw something I recognized," he said slowly. "I saw what we have all become in this war, victims of other people's choices, left to die by those who should have protected us." The medicine woman nodded thoughtfully. "And you think saving one white woman will heal the wounds in your spirit?" "No," Jacob admitted, "but maybe it will prevent one more wound from festering." Ayana studied Ella's flushed face for a long moment, then looked around at the watching tribe. "Take her to my lodge. I will see what can be done." "Grandmother, no." The protest came from Takoda, a young warrior whose father had died in a skirmish with soldiers just months earlier. "She is our enemy. Her people kill us without mercy." "And that is why we are not them," Ayana replied sharply. "I am medicine woman to all who suffer, not just those whose skin matches mine." She turned back to Jacob. "But understand this, grandson. If she lives, she becomes your responsibility. Whatever consequences come from this choice, you must bear them alone." Jacob nodded grimly. He had expected no less. Leading Ella to the medicine woman's wickiup, he gently laid her on a bed of soft furs. Ayana immediately began examining the infected arm, clicking her tongue at what she found. "The bone is badly set. It must be broken again and reset properly, or she will never use this arm." The old woman looked at Jacob meaningfully. "Such healing requires great pain. She may not survive it." And if you don't reset it, the poison in her blood will kill her by tomorrow's sunset. Jacob closed his eyes briefly. Either choice meant agony for Ella, but only one offered hope of survival. Do what must be done. As Ayanna prepared her medicines and instruments, word of the white woman's presence spread through the camp like wildfire. Small groups gathered outside the medicine lodge, their voices rising in heated debate. Some argued that Jacob had lost his mind, that bringing an enemy into their midst was madness. Others wondered if this might be part of some larger plan, a way to gain intelligence about white settlements, or to use her as a bargaining chip. Inside the lodge, Ella stirred to consciousness as Ayanna began cleaning her wounds. Her green eyes fluttered open, immediately focusing on the elderly Apache woman bending over her with sharp instruments and strange-smelling herbs. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with fever. "Safe," Jacob said, moving into her line of sight. "This is Ayanna, our medicine woman. She's going to help you." Ella tried to sit up and immediately fell back with a gasp of pain. "Your people, they look angry. I can hear them outside, talking about me." "Some are angry," Jacob admitted. "They have reason to be, but you are under my protection, and that means something to them. What if it doesn't mean enough?" Before Jacob could answer, the lodge flap burst open, and Nalnish strode inside, his hand resting on his war club. Behind him came 3 other warriors, their faces set with grim determination. "Enough of this madness, Jacob," Nalnish declared. "The council has spoken. This white woman dies now, before she can bring soldiers down upon us." Jacob rose slowly, placing himself between the warriors and Ella's prone form. "No council was called. You speak only for yourself and your anger. I speak for every family that has buried children because of her people." Nalnish's voice rose dangerously. "How many Apache must die for one white woman's life?" "None," Jacob said quietly. "But I will not let you murder a helpless woman to ease your pain." The tension in the lodge was explosive. 4 armed warriors faced Jacob, who had only his knife against their clubs and rifles. Ayanna continued her work with steady hands, but Ella could see the fear in the old woman's eyes. This confrontation had been building since Jacob first rode into camp, and now it threatened to tear the band apart. "You would fight your own people for her?" one of the other warriors asked incredulously. "Have you forgotten who you are?" "I have remembered who I am," Jacob replied. "I am Apache. We do not murder the helpless, no matter what race they belong to. The white eyes show us no such mercy. Then we are better than them, or have you forgotten that as well?" The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Outside, the entire camp had gone silent, sensing the crisis building within the medicine lodge. This was about more than one white woman's life. This was about who they were as a people, about whether they would let their enemies' cruelty poison their own souls. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tension. "What happens here?" Every head turned toward the lodge entrance, where Chief Cocheta stood framed against the morning sun. The leader of their band was a man of 45 years, his hair streaked with premature gray from the weight of keeping his people alive in increasingly desperate times. His presence immediately changed the dynamics in the lodge. "Great Father," Nalnish began, "Jacob has brought our enemy into our midst. He risks all our lives for one white woman." Cocheta's weathered face gave away nothing as he studied the scene before him. His gaze moved from the angry warriors to Jacob's defiant stance, finally settling on Ella, lying fevered and broken on the furs. "She is injured," he observed. "She is dying," Ayanna added without looking up from her work. "But she can be saved, if these fools stop interrupting my healing." The chief moved closer, studying Ella's face with the same intensity he might use to evaluate a potential threat. "How did she come to be here?" Jacob told the story quickly and honestly, holding back nothing. The abandonment by her brother, the approaching storm, his decision to bring her to safety. Throughout his tale, Cocheta's expression remained unreadable. When Jacob finished, silence filled the lodge. Finally, Cocheta spoke, his voice carrying the authority of absolute leadership. "Jacob acted with honor," he said simply. "The woman stays." Nalnish stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Great Father, with respect, this is madness. She will bring death upon us all." "Perhaps," Cocheta acknowledged, "but we will not become killers of the helpless to prevent it. That path leads only to darkness." He fixed each of the warriors with his steady gaze. "Return to your duties. The woman is under my protection as well as Jacob's." The dismissal was absolute. One by one, the warriors filed out of the lodge, Nalnish last, and most reluctantly. When they were gone, Cocheta turned to Jacob. "You have made a dangerous choice, nephew. This woman's presence will bring complications you cannot imagine." "I know," Jacob replied, "but it was the right choice." "Perhaps. Time will tell." The chief glanced down at Ella, who had been watching the entire exchange with fevered fascination. If she lives, she will see things no white person has seen. She will learn our ways, hear our stories. What happens when she returns to her people with that knowledge? It was a question Jacob hadn't fully considered, and one that had no easy answer. If Ella survived and eventually returned to white society, she would carry with her intimate knowledge of Apache life, their strengths and weaknesses, their hiding places and customs. She could be invaluable to those who sought to destroy them. Maybe she won't return, Jacob said quietly. Cochetta's eyebrows rose slightly. You think she would choose to stay among us, choose exile from her own kind? I don't know, but stranger things have happened in these strange times. Outside the lodge, the sounds of normal camp life were resuming, but Jacob knew the underlying tension remained. His choice had divided his people, created cracks in their unity that their enemies could exploit. But as he looked down at Ella's fevered face, he found he couldn't regret his decision. Some choices were worth the consequences, no matter how dire they might prove to be. She was alive. Jacob knelt beside Ella as dawn broke over the Apache camp 3 days later, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. The fever had finally broken during the night, and her green eyes were clear when they opened to meet his gaze. Ayana's brutal treatment had worked, resetting the broken bone and drawing the poison from her blood, but the cost had been 3 days of delirium and agony. "The pain is less," Ella whispered, testing her newly splintered arm carefully. "I can actually think clearly again." "Good. You gave us quite a scare." Jacob offered her water from a gourd, supporting her head as she drank. "Ayana wasn't sure you would survive the bone setting." Ella glanced around the medicine lodge, taking in the bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling, the sacred symbols painted on the hide walls. "How long was I unconscious?" 3 days. "The entire camp has been watching to see if you would live or die." "And hoping for which outcome?" Jacob's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "That remains divided." As if summoned by their conversation, voices rose outside the lodge, not angry this time, but excited, urgent. Jacob's expression immediately grew alert as he recognized the tone of scouts returning with important news. "What is it?" Ella asked, seeing his sudden tension. "Riders approaching the camp. Stay here." Jacob rose quickly, checking his weapons before stepping outside. The camp was buzzing with activity as 2 Apache scouts rode hard into the canyon, their horses lathered with sweat. Jacob joined the crowd gathering around them as they dismounted near Chief Cochetta's wickiup. "Great Father," the lead scout called out. "Cavalry patrol, 2 miles east, 30 soldiers following the old trade route." Cochetta emerged from his lodge, his face grim. "How close did they come to our trail?" "They found the wagon wreckage," the second scout reported. "They are following tracks, searching for survivors." Jacob felt ice form in his stomach. The soldiers were looking for Ella, following the trail he had left when he carried her from the crash site. In his concern for her injuries, he had been less careful than usual about concealing their passage. "They will find us," Nalnish declared, pushing forward through the crowd. His scarred face was tight with fury as he glared at Jacob. "This is what comes of harboring our enemies. You have led death to our door." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered Apache. Even those who had supported Jacob's decision to save Ella now faced the stark reality of what that choice might cost them. 30 cavalry soldiers were more than their small band could fight, especially with women and children to protect. "We can move deeper into the mountains," Jacob suggested. "Lose them in the high country. With winter coming?" Cochetta shook his head. "The children and elders would not survive. We need to stay near water and shelter." "Then we fight," declared Takoda, the young warrior whose father had died fighting soldiers. "We make them pay for hunting us." "And lose half our people in the process," Cochetta replied grimly. "No, there must be another way." Jacob stood silent for a moment, a terrible idea forming in his mind. There was another way, one that would save his people but cost him everything he held dear. As the debate continued around him, he quietly slipped away from the crowd and returned to the medicine lodge. Ella looked up as he entered, immediately reading the tension in his posture. "What's happening out there?" "Soldiers," Jacob said simply, "following our trail from the wagon crash. They'll find the camp within hours." Ella's face went pale. "They're looking for me." "Yes. Then I have to go back to them. If I return willingly, tell them I was rescued by friendly Indians. Maybe they'll leave your people alone." Jacob stared at her, surprised by her offer. Here was a woman who had every reason to want rescue by her own kind, yet she was willing to lie to protect the people who had been her captors, people who had debated killing her just days before. "You would do that? Protect us?" Your people saved my life when my own brother left me to die. I won't repay that kindness by bringing death to your camp." Ella struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain in her healing arm. "Besides, I've seen how you live, heard your stories. I understand now what my people have done to yours." Jacob felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with recognition. Here was a woman of honor, someone who understood the weight of moral debt and was prepared to pay it regardless of personal cost. "There is another way," he said quietly, "but it would mean leaving everything I have ever known." Ella studied his face, seeing the conflict there. "What do you mean?" "I could take you away from here, far south to Mexico, where neither Apache nor white soldiers would find us. We could build a new life together, away from this war." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Jacob was offering to become an exile, to abandon his people and his identity for her sake. It was a sacrifice so profound that Ella could barely comprehend it. "Jacob, you can't. Your people need you. My people need to survive. And right now, my presence among them threatens that survival." He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his calloused fingers. "But I need to know something first. These past days, as you recovered, as you watched our ways, what do you see when you look at me?" Ella met his gaze directly, seeing past the war paint and weapons to the man beneath. "I see someone who chose compassion over hatred, someone who saved my life when he had every reason to let me die. I see a man of honor in a world that seems to have forgotten what honor means. And could you love such a man, even knowing what he has done, the lives he has taken?" The question cut straight to the heart of everything that stood between them. Ella thought of her brother's cowardice, of the society that had taught her to fear and hate Jacob's people, without ever trying to understand them. Then she thought of the gentleness with which this warrior had tended her wounds, the respect he showed for the elderly medicine woman, the way he had risked everything to protect her. "I already do," she whispered. Jacob closed his eyes, overwhelmed by emotions he had never expected to feel for a white woman. When he opened them again, his face was set with determination. "Then we leave tonight. I know paths through the mountains that even Apache scouts cannot follow. We can reach the border in 2 weeks. Wait." Ella gripped his hand tighter. "What about your people? What happens to them when the soldiers come? Cocheta will find a way. He always does. And without me here, without you here, the soldiers will have no reason to pursue this band. They will move on, look elsewhere." It was logical, even noble in its way, but Ella could see the pain in Jacob's eyes at the thought of abandoning his tribe. She had lost her family to betrayal and cowardice. She wouldn't be the cause of Jacob losing his to exile. "No," she said firmly, "there has to be another way. What if I went back to the soldiers, told them I was rescued by a different Apache band, led them away from here? Too dangerous. If they suspected you were lying, then we make sure they don't suspect." Ella's mind was racing now, seeing possibilities. What if some of your warriors escorted me partway back, made it look like they were returning me for a reward? The soldiers would follow us away from the camp. Jacob considered this, seeing the merit in her plan, but also the risks. If the deception was discovered, Ella would be in terrible danger, and any Apache with her would likely be killed on sight. Outside, the voices were growing more urgent as the scouts reported the soldiers' steady approach. Time was running out, and decisions had to be made quickly. "There is a third option," Jacob said slowly, "but it would require great courage from you and great trust from my people. Tell me, you could become one of us, not just in name but in truth, adopt our ways, learn our language fully, become Apache in heart as well as circumstance. If you were truly one of us, the soldiers might never find you, even if they searched the camp." Ella stared at him, understanding the magnitude of what he was suggesting. To become Apache would mean abandoning everything she had ever known, cutting all ties to white society forever. She would be dead to her former world, reborn into a culture that was still largely foreign to her. But as she looked at Jacob's face, saw the hope and fear warring there, Ella realized the choice had already been made in her heart days ago. This man had shown her what true honor looked like. His people had saved her life and shown her kindness when they had every reason to show her hatred. Where else did she have to go? What did white society offer her, except the memory of betrayal and abandonment? How would it work? She asked. Ayana would perform a ceremony, a ritual adoption. You would be given an Apache name, declared a daughter of the tribe. It would not be easy. Some would never accept you fully, but others would, in time. And us? What would happen between us? Jacob's dark eyes grew warm. That would be your choice to make, but I would court you properly in the Apache way if you would have me. Before Ella could respond, Chief Cocheta's voice boomed across the camp, calling all warriors to council. The The crisis was reaching its peak, and decisions could no longer be delayed. Jacob rose, his hand still holding Ella's. The choice must be made now. What will it be? Ella looked into his eyes, seeing her future reflected there, a future that would be difficult, dangerous, unlike anything she had ever imagined for herself, but also a future filled with purpose, honor, and the love of a man who had proved his worth in the most fundamental ways possible. "I choose to stay," she said quietly. "I choose to become Apache. I choose you." Jacob's smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. He squeezed her hand gently, then leaned down to press his forehead against hers in a gesture of intimacy that transcended cultural boundaries. "Then we face whatever comes together," he whispered. Outside, the drums were beginning to beat, calling the people to prepare for whatever trials lay ahead. But inside the medicine lodge, two hearts had found each other across the divide of race and culture, proving that love could bloom even in the harsh desert of war. As Jacob helped Ella to her feet, preparing to face their tribe and their future together, neither knew that their choice would echo through generations, a story of courage and love that would be told around Apache fires for years to come. The soldiers were still coming, the dangers still real, but Jacob and Ella would meet them as one people, united by bonds stronger than blood and deeper than the ancient hatreds that had brought them together. If you enjoyed this epic tale of love and courage in the Old West, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures. Every subscription helps us grow and create even better content for you.